Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, you rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to see you. Away, we're bound away, across the wide Missouri. The white man loved the Indian maiden. Away, you rolling river. With an ocean's his canoe was laden. Away, we're bound away, across the wide Missouri. Oh, Shenandoah, I love your daughter. Away, you rolling river. I'll take her across those raging waters. Away, we're bound away, across the wide Missouri. Missouri, she's a mighty river. Away, you rolling river. Missouri, she's a mighty river. Away, we're bound away, across the wide Missouri. Oh, Shenandoah, I'll not deceive you. Away, you rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I'll never grieve you. Away, we're bound away, across the wide Missouri. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, you rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, we're bound away, across the wide Missouri.
Rises way, hey, and up she rises way, hey, and up she rises early in the morning. Lie, 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 lie. Put him in the longboat till he's sober, put him in the longboat till he's sober, put him in the longboat till he's sober early in the morning. Give him a taste of salt and water, give him a taste of salt and water, give him a taste of salt and water early in the morning. Way, hey, and up she rises, way, hey, and up she rises, way, hey, and up she rises early in the morning. Put him in the scuppers with a hose pipe on him, put him in the scuppers with a hose pipe on him, put him in the scuppers with a hose pipe on him early in the morning. Hoist him with a leg in the leg and bowline, hoist him with a leg in the run and bowline, hoist him with a leg in the run and bowline early in the morning. Send him up the crow's nest till he falls down. Send him up the crow's nest till he falls down. Send him up the crow's nest till he falls down early in the morning. Way, hey, and up she rises, way, hey, and up she rises, way, hey, and up she rises early in the morning.
Tonight is our 16th annual Krebs Cemetery tour. They've all been quite educational. We think tonight you're in for a real treat. We want you to learn about the seafaring ways of your wonderful city. Now, I am Joseph Simon de Lapointe. I was kind of the first guy. Think of that name now. That's the Lapointe Krebs house. I'm the Lapointe. I first came over here in the 1700s. They let us come back once a year around Halloween to talk to you if you hadn't figured that out already. But I came with a real interesting group. I came with the two, we were French. We came from France through Quebec, Canada, then all the way down around Florida and up into the Gulf with the brothers Lemoyne. I think you've heard them. Their first names were D'Iberville and Bienville. And the three of us in our crew were on this wonderful frigate called the Renommée. And we were looking for the mouth of the Mississippi River, which by then had become known as a major artery. Well, first we found the mouth of the Pascagoula River, and we were just taken. And we stopped here for many days, and we loved it from first sight, finished our exploration. But then a few years later, I came back with a group of my own from France because I had an aunt named the Duchess de Chaumont who owned a parcel of land up above Lake Pascagoula back here. And I was sent over with a group to protect it and make sure that the French could continue to control the land and set up some settlements. I found out now I'm going to get exact on it, 1721, that land parcels were being granted, land grants, we call them nowadays, I think I'm told. I applied for one, had a good background, French Navy, you gotta like the Napoleon hat, and I got it, and it was this land right here, all the way from over there, that big oak you'll see when you get in, to around the bend actually here. And I said Lake Pascagoula, that was the name, but now it's Krebs Lake, named after my son-in-law, Hugo Krebs. Here we go again with history, the Lapointe Krebs house. And there we go, a French and a German guy. Maybe later I understand a couple of world wars, that would have been interesting, but we were the starters of this community. And we built a beautiful plantation, beautiful grounds, stables, carriage houses, beautiful homes, and only one, that's 300 years, folks. Only one is left. We just went through it. And that is, I think you've been told, or maybe in some of the leaflets, I think they call them nowadays, that were given out, that's the oldest standing structure in the Mississippi Valley. And I think those of you who grew up in Pascagoula, and I certainly grew up in the 1700s in Pascagoula, we kind of take that for granted a little bit. Think of that sentence, the oldest standing structure in the Mississippi River Valley. That's right there. Okay, well, a couple more history factoids before we get you up in the spooky part of the tour here. The 1726, the French governor of Louisiana, who was over New Orleans, sent a garrison, meaning a pretty good grouping of troops over here to use some of our land to make sure back then a lot of European countries were coming over to America when they found out how wonderful it was to try to get land. So the governor of Louisiana wanted to protect this whole area from the English and the Spanish, and so he set up a fort over here. They had, well, you see that one cannon there, they had a bunch of big cannons. It was quite the military operation on part of the land. So at that point, as the years went on up into the 1800s and such, people around here, as this community and this county were growing, started to say, yeah, well, the old French fort, okay? And somewhere there in the 1800s, for a few years, the Spanish came and took over the area. They used it as a military situation, and now here we go. In the late 1800s or so, people started saying, well, yeah, the old Spanish fort. Now, a lot of you who grew up around here or studied the area, for many, many years, that was it, the old Spanish fort. School tours, cool place, the whole bit. Now, I'm told that a wonderful group of local historians about 20 years ago, some of them, my direct descendants, took it upon themselves to re-educate the community, and as I mentioned earlier, it's now the Lapointe Krebs zone because that is the proper name. But I thought it was fair for you to understand that there was a reason it was once called the old Spanish fort. But just keep saying that during the night, so tomorrow when you're telling friends we're at Lapointe Krebs zone. Lapointe crabs on. So, as you go up in there tonight, you're going to meet a lot of very interesting people. One of the first three that you will meet is Marie Krebs. No, wait, she is too removed from me. I want to get that. Marie Louise DuPont Krebs. She is the daughter-in-law of my son-in-law, Hugo Krebs. So, all those connections. Hey folks, even in the 1700s, this was the South. Everybody knows everybody. It kind of works like that, you know. So you'll meet her later. You're going to meet the very famous Admiral David Farragut, who's known as one of the greatest admirals in the history of the United States of America, and many others. And what this will educate you to, we hope, is something you probably already know, is the rich, rich, rich maritime tradition that Pascagoula and the surrounding area have. So go and learn, follow your tour guide, and I will wish you fair skies, fair winds, following seas. Thank you.
Good evening. How are all of you this evening? We're so glad you came out for our tour. And my name is Maria Louisa DuPont Krebs, and I am the widow of Joseph Krebs, who is the firstborn son of Hugo Krebs and his wife Maria Josepha de Lapointe. And you've already learned you met Mr. de Lapointe. So Joseph died fairly young. I lived to be 80. And I, being married to the oldest Krebs gentleman, he and his brothers, younger brothers, 4, were all shipbuilders and sailors. And in 1825, he built a schooner called the New Year. And Francois Henry from Mobile was tasked with being the master of the vessel. And he was a Creole, part black, part French, and he came over and married the most eligible, most prominent Creole in the area, which were the de Flanders. This is Mrs. Sophia de Flanders. And so together they lived along with the Krebs, and we're happy they're here tonight.
And yes, the New Year was a beautiful vessel, 45 feet in length, displacing 26 tons. It was constructed to navigate the coastal waters, the shallow bays with the oyster reefs and the sandbars. It had wide beams for carrying cargo, plenty of sail for pulling large fishing trawls. It was strong enough to withstand the furies of the Gulf storms. With skill and being a careful master, it was able to travel across the Gulf to Cuban and Mexican ports.
Francois, it makes me so proud to hear you speak of your love for sailing these wonderful boats. You earned a good living for us working for the Krebs. Perhaps these descendants here with us tonight do not realize that our French and black heritage made us free blacks. Legally, we could earn pay for our labor and also buy and sell land.
Well, because of the dangers and hardships of life at sea, many immigrants, Native Americans, and free blacks was welcomed as sailors and shipbuilders, just as I. Mr. Krebs recognized my ability and my skill and made me the master of the New Year.
Yes, he did. And it proved to be a very successful arrangement for all of us. Finish? That's it.
In 1875, we shared the land with our children and other relatives, forming a community known as Creole Town. Our oldest son, Francis, received Lot 1, which is where the Pavco plant is today. Our daughter, Mercy Lee, married Louis Krebs and received Lot 2, just across Henry Street, which is now called North Market Street. In fact, our daughter, Julia Henry Remedy, is buried here in Krebs Cemetery, right over there.
And I inherited 4,000 acres from my father, Mr. DuPont, Jean-Claude DuPont. So I was, and living to be 80, I was quite the businesswoman around town. And I was very glad to sell this land of Creole Town to the Henrys. And in the next scene, you're going to meet the young woman that I adopted, as well as having a slew of children myself. I adopted Elizabeth Farragut, whose brother became Admiral Davy Farragut. You're going to meet them. But we would like to say good night. Oh, and he's going to say some more about the free blacks. Yeah. He's going to say that's the most important part.
Our local free blacks were not the only ones who went to seeking freedom, fame, and fortune. Many from New England would go to sea and work as whalers, which was a more dangerous profession. In fact, a whaler ship, the 65-foot industry, sank just 70 miles off the coast of Pascagoula. And that ship was manned by all black crew and Native Americans. And this is all that remains of the industry. Wow.
Oh, it's really heavy.
And many others will join the U.S. Navy, but that is a story that you will hear as you continue on the tour.
So now, good night.
Good night. Thanks for visiting.
I am Elizabeth Farragut DuPont, and this is my brother David. Our father was George Farragut, a naval commander who served in the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812.
William, my older brother, and I followed my father's footsteps in joining the Navy. Now, William was already in the Navy when our mother passed away in 1810 due to the yellow fever epidemic in New Orleans. I was adopted by a family friend and naval officer, David Porter, and I actually joined the U.S. Navy and went to sea at the age of 9.
Can you imagine? Yes, and I was not much older when our mother died. I was 10 years old. And of course, my father couldn't care for me. He was away at sea. So a very gracious Pascagoula lady whom you met as you came in, Marie Louisa DuPont Krebs, adopted me. And I had a very happy childhood here with her. Now, eventually, I would go on to marry her nephew. My husband was, wait a minute. Celestine Stan DuPont. You know, at my age, I can't remember names anyway, so they gave me a lot of names. Anyway, our sister Nancy was in New Orleans, and she remained there at the Ursuline Academy for her education. She went on there to marry a renowned architect, Louis Francois Gurley. And they were to maintain households both in New Orleans and here in Pascagoula?
My father, William, and myself all served in the War of 1812. Now, during the War of 1812, I was on the USS Essex with my adopted father, Captain Porter, and our job was to capture British whalers, which we did quite often. We captured several. Well, at the age of 12, I was given the responsibility to bring one of those British whalers into port, which I did. I would continue to serve in the Navy through the Civil War.
Yes, and in 1862, you were given the honor to command a Gulf blockade squadron, which was to the detriment of Nancy and I living here in Pascagoula, of course. As you realize, my brother was fighting for the other side. So, in distress, Nancy and I wrote to you, David, and you did not respond. We were very concerned about the conditions here in Pascagoula, but to no avail.
Still here.
Yes, we haven't forgotten. But at least he did visit us eventually, and he promised us that he would avoid the destruction of our hometown, Pascagoula, when he attacked Mobile.
Yes, actually it was very fortuitous for me to have stopped here in Pascagoula because it allowed me to hire Martin Freeman, who was a local shipmaster, to get him to guide my fleet into Mobile Bay. Now, my flagship was the USS Hartman, and it was a large steamer with 25 guns mounted on it. Now, entering Mobile Bay was difficult because the Confederates had set up 3 forts guarding the mouth of the bay. Fort Gaines, that's on the east end of Dauphin Island. Fort Powell, which was just a few miles north of Fort Gaines, still on the west side of Mobile Bay. And then, of course, the main fort, Fort Morgan, that's on the east side of the bay. In addition to those forts, there were several smaller batteries that would fire at any ship coming through. And there were floating mines that had been placed in the water called torpedoes that required, when the ships came in, they had to pass close within the firing range of the forts. Now, during the battle, the smoke got so heavy where you couldn't see what was going on. I climbed the mast of my ship to get to the top to see what was going on. And it was up there when I could see what was going on, and I quoted and coined the Navy battle cry that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, when I shouted, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." Now, it took a lot of skill and maneuvering to run that gauntlet, and I had 2 of my crew members that received the Medal of Honor for their service during that engagement. Martin Freeman, who had guided our fleet into the bay, and a John H. Lawson, who was one of several free black sailors in my crew.
Yes, and I am so proud to say that there were 8 Medals of Honor of the 307 awarded to free black sailors. That is quite an honor.
Yes, and for my leadership, I became the very first admiral of the U.S. Navy, and I served for a total of 60 years. But I think we need to let these good people continue on to the next stop to learn a little bit more about some of the events that took place.
He's always bossing me.
I'm Captain Miguel Paul.
I'm Captain Miguel Farah.
I'm Condolora Villa Fletches.
In 1855, my partner Miguel Farah and I built the schooner Seahorse, a 60-foot, 42-ton vessel built to maneuver the shallow bays and coastal waters of the Gulf of Mexico. She had to be well built to withstand violent storms that suddenly arise on what appears to be a beautiful day. Schooners of this type would also venture as far away as Cuba and Veracruz, Mexico, with a skilled captain and crew.
Cotton was grown throughout the Pascagoula River basin as far north as Meridian, Mississippi. They would harvest it there and take the bales and put them on barges and bring them down the river to Pascagoula. They were then transloaded from the barge to boats like the Seahorse, which could carry 120 bales of cotton. They would load them on the Seahorse, and it would take them usually to either Mobile or New Orleans, where they were put on bigger and faster boats and shipped to Great Britain and ports in Europe for the textile mills.
The outbreak of the Civil War would make shipping cotton a strategic focus for the Confederacy. Cotton would fund the purchase of weapons and supplies for the Army. As you heard from Admiral David Farragut earlier, the Union would blockade the coast and disrupt the cotton trade.
During the critical war years, 1863 and 1864 of the Civil War, I was the sole owner and master of the Seahorse. Some people said that I was a blockade runner, but I cannot deny or confirm that accusation at this time. But after the war, we built bigger vessels and sold them as far away to customers in Corpus Christi, Texas, and ports all along the Gulf Coast.
We hired Joseph Fletches to serve as the master of the Seahorse. This allowed us to expand our shipbuilding to meet the rise in post-war demand for ships and barges. I also ventured forth into the growing seafood industry and opened the Scranton Fish Company. Since this was at the height of the tourism trade, I also opened up a small hotel to service the visitors arriving by train to Scranton.
And I want to thank you both for allowing my husband Joseph Fletches to be the master of the beautiful schooner, the Seahorse. Most of us are Spanish, as you have probably detected, and my father fought in the American Revolution. He was General Villa over in Pensacola, and we settled there. And my husband Joseph, like George Farragut, was born on a Spanish island in the Mediterranean and became a seafarer at a very early age, like most people of that generation. Our youngest son, Miguel, started a shipyard here in Pascagoula, about a quarter of the mile right down there, and built his first ship in 1896. So lots of my people are here. Now, Miguel Paul was an excellent businessman. He's a humble sort, and he would be reluctant to tell you he's the individual who donated the land for the first courthouse here in Pascagoula. So, on behalf of the Historical Society and all our sponsors, we hope you enjoyed the program tonight. If you haven't had a chance to donate and you'd like to donate, we have a box for you. If not, we wish you all a very good evening, and thank you for coming.
And that was the way to ease the pain of the crew. So every shift, they would get a little taste of grog, one, to ease the pain. The lemon and lime was, as you said, for the scurvy, and that's kind of a little bit of the history of grog. Now, the term groggy is a derivative of that, which means some of the crew was really smart. They would save their ration of rum from one shift to the next. And so, you know, after 2 or 3 shifts of saving their rum ration and having it, then they would be totally drunk. All right, and then all of a sudden what happens? The captain sounds, "Sound general quarters, all hands on deck." All right, and then you've got this guy, and he is so groggy. That's where the term groggy comes from. And the captain says, "Up to the mast." You know, And he looks up, and it's 50 feet up there, and he's going to climb up on that little rope and start handling wet, soaking wet sails. So that's the story of Grog. All right? So, y'all ready?
Let me go home, wanna